千里之行，始于足下。A journey of 1,000 miles begins beneath the feet. We now gather in the Tao to travel the journey together. Welcome to Tao Talks with Derek Lin, where we take a deep dive into the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu. I would like to extend a warm welcome to you. Thank you for joining us. I would like to invite you to center your thoughts and direct your attention to this moment in time, to the here and now, to be fully present and mindfully aware as we all ready ourselves for this sacred process in the Tao with one another. So, without further ado, let us continue with Tao Te Ching 29. The chapter title for 29 is The Natural. As we discussed last time, the primary teaching from this chapter is how the sages look to nature for insights from their observations. They apply what they have learned from the myriad things to living among human beings in society. Therefore, to live the best possible life is to live life in a natural way, or according to nature, congruent with the Tao. Today, we will continue to explore exactly how they do that. Here is Tao Te Ching chapter 29, containing 15 lines. Previously, we did our sectional analysis as usual, and here is the result. We were able to spot the repeating characters from one line to the next, indicating a poetic structure in the ancient Chinese text. Then we identified the section breaks, and we can see 3 sections. There's the introduction, there's the main section, and the conclusion. Previously, in our last meeting, we were able to get to line 4. So from line 1 to line 4, what it talks about is the concept of 天下, all below heaven, everything below the sky. And that can be translated in a variety of ways. You can see those 2 characters circled in the slide here. So let us do a quick recap on exactly what we talked about previously, recapping from line 3 onward. The most important concept that we touched on last week is encapsulated here. The first 2 characters, literally all under heaven, often translated as the world, as I have done here. There is another interpretation that 天下 means everybody under heaven, all under the sun. This was the approach taken by one of the masters that I studied under. So you'll see his interpretation in number 1, 天下, meaning the collective mind of all the people. People being the vessels of this intangible quality, the soul, the mind, human consciousness, or human spirituality. Another way to see it is that this is about the Tao that manifests as the mind, the soul, etc., within all people. So those support the idea that 天下 is referring to everybody. The other interpretation that flows more easily and makes intuitive sense is that all under the sky is just about the world, the entire world. And when we say the world, that can have different levels of meaning. So, as it says at the bottom of this slide, like all the other teachings of the Tao, world manifests at different levels. The meaning, the teaching is equally valid at each level, as I will show in a moment. So what about the other two characters? The last two characters, 神器, literally a divine tool, instrument, or vessel. The first character there, or the third character in this line, that can be interpreted as spirituality, it also means divine or divinity. And the second character there, or the last character in this line, is the character that means tool, instrument, or vessel. Together, these two characters depict something that is to be respected and revered, something that cannot be possessed or controlled. So what if someone tries to control it? That's addressed in the next line. So this is the slide that we ended up last time. The people-oriented interpretation of my master basically says one cannot control or coerce the mind of the people. Attempting to control or coerce them, all attempts throughout history have backfired. One can only influence or inspire the mind of the people through the Tao. The second, more common interpretation requires more in-depth explanation. As you can see in this slide, the world in which we live is divine by its very nature. Human beings are finite. The Tao is feminine. So being infinite, it is endless. You and I, being finite, none of us has endless resources to tap into or draw from. Plus, we live out our lives in a very finite duration, measured in decades. Therefore, if the finite, that is us, attempt to control the infinite, a manifestation of the eternal Tao, we are bound to fail. So this is where we address the question, the world, what exactly is the meaning of that? I mentioned just a moment ago that the Tao is constant or unchanging, and it applies at every level of reality. So let's talk about the different levels of the world. First, we can talk about your world. This existence that you are working your way through, it is sacred. We can also talk about the land. In ancient times, this was a reference to the land of the Warring Stage period in ancient China. Then we can also talk about the world in terms of nature. That is, not just the land where the people live, but the natural world that contains the land that people inhabit. And therefore, all the myriad things, all the animals, all the plants, they're all included in that. We can further zoom out from that perspective to look at this planet. This is a modern perspective unknown to the ancients that looked at the entire world as a whole. So the world, in all these different levels of contextual meaning, is divine and cannot be controlled. So the second line that we looked at previously says, those who wish to take the world and control it, they will not succeed. They will fail. So what we ought to do is to pull all these ideas together in one illustration to encapsulate that meaning. So let's run through those levels. We talked about your world, meaning your life. This is the personal realm. It's all that you experience, think, and feel. It is essentially the Tao expressing itself through you. Thus, attempts to dominate life will never succeed. We're talking about how your life is inclusive of everything you do, how you live, the way you act, how you transform throughout your life. Why is this sacred? Well, it is your opportunity to experience physical existence in this life, the personal private world that you live, where you can learn from your experience. So as I said, it is the Tao is expressing itself as the specific you. The Tao, in a sense, is temporarily inhabiting form and shape to know itself through the unique lens of your awareness. So, that being the case, if you try to control every outcome in your life, if you resist every change that comes your way, that excessive interference or excessive resistance can be to get in the way of the natural unfolding process that was meant to be respected. So this is the reason why the Tao teaches us to ride the wave and not try to push back against the wave. And I know surfers who say they learn very quickly to respect the waves, so that when they surf, they are working in partnership with the wave, not against it. They know there is no controlling or conquering the wave. In the same way, for us living our lives, there's no controlling or conquering the Tao that manifests. So the second context of the world is the land, the human realm. And I mentioned that in ancient times, this referred to the land of the people, where people lived. It reflected the human beings who inhabited on this land. What I mean by that is when the land is torn apart by war and conquest, the land was a reflection of human greed, bloodlust. But when unified under wise rule, it becomes the ground of order and harmony. So in that way, it serves as a reflection. Why is it sacred? Because once it becomes unified, attains oneness, it brings peace to the people. It brings an end to the chaos and strife. And therefore, when one tries to take the world by force, is to destroy the sanctity, is to cause destruction of what was originally sacred. And this was a pointed criticism of the warlords and kings of the Warring States period, who did exactly that. The lesson to them was that it is only by serving the land rather than to subdue it that is the only way that the rulers can bring lasting peace, because the land belonged to no one. Only those who rule with humility can preserve and amplify the divinity. So we also talked about nature as yet another context of the world. This is the living realm, the vast ecosystem of life, nourishing and sustaining the myriad things, all living things. If we were to exploit it, we ruin the order that has always been present, always been nurturing and sustaining. So it's easy to see this is the context of the great outdoors, the environments, the ecology. Sacred because it provided for us as it does for all the myriad things. It nourishes us, protects us, and shelters us as it does for them. It is a setting where we, humanity, can survive and thrive. All the elements of this setting, think about the mountains, rivers on the ground, the clouds in the sky, the vegetation, the forests around us, all the plants and creatures. Nature gives unconditionally without asking for anything in return, or indeed any recognition at all. It becomes like an effortless circulation of the Tao through the water that flows across the land, the water that seeps into the soil, and the sunlight that shines upon the trees, the flowers, the animals, and us. To exploit this great beauty and perfection is to violate the sacred order, whereas to live in harmony with nature is to protect it. And finally, moving to the modern context, the Earth, the planet, the global realm. This modern view extends the Tao to the globe as a whole. This is our birthplace, our only home among the stars, at least for now. Desecrating the earth through greed, exploitation, or neglect, it is not only unwise, it's dangerous, because if we ruin this planet, that's it for us. There is no backup. It is unique and irreplaceable. The Earth, a living blue-green sphere, a cradle that is so abundant, providing for life in an infinite void. It is on Earth that the Tao reveals itself in miracles. First, the emergence of life, more than 4 billion years ago. Then, the emergence of intelligence, human intelligence. That is why it is such an awful history that humanity has had in exploiting, desecrating the balance. Whereas if we revere the earth as divine, we would act as caretakers, the stewards of a vessel far greater and far more intricate than we can comprehend. Think of the earth as the Tao made visible, because without the earth, there is no us. All of this brings us to what Zhuangzi had written, what Laozi had written 2,500 years ago. The world is a sacred instrument. One cannot control it. Line 5. The one who controls it will fail. So Laozi is being very emphatic here, because history shows those who attempt to control will always meet with failure. And as I mentioned previously, Laozi, in his secular role as the royal archivist, had access to historical chronicles. Reading through them, he could see that pattern most clearly. The historical pattern of this persisted even after the time of Laozi. When the Warring States period came to a close, it was because the Qing dynasty had unified the land. The first emperor of that, Emperor Qin Shi Huang, ruled with an iron fist of absolute control. After unifying China, he centralized power, he burned books and suppressed scholars. The great burning of the books is why numerous classics from before the Warring States period have been forever lost to history. So, what success did this emperor achieve? Qin Shi Huang he named himself the beginning emperor of his dynasty, which collapsed within 15 years. So he was the first and the last. Excessive control created rebellion and instability, which were exactly what he feared. That excess in control breeds resistance. The rigidity of force and violence cannot sustain harmony, because it is the exact opposite. So it isn't just history where we can learn this. If we look around in our lives, we see plenty of examples where an excess in attempting to control something results in that something not working out very well. Something as simple as a pancake. Flipping that on the grill, if you do that too much, it tears apart. What you try to force ruins what patience would have perfected. Think about something as simple as watering a plant. If you do that too much because you want to make it grow faster, that too is an excess of control. The plant dies from root rot because growth cannot be forced. Or think about how we deal with our friends, and sometimes they have a problem. I have seen times when someone tries to fix a friend's problem, but they do that as an excess in control instead of listening. I have seen how this strains their friendship because the help that was given was an imposition. It was not offered in harmony. So these observations in the Tao tell us something. They are something that we can reflect upon for us. Every listen in the Tao is both an observation and a reflection. Learning from history, observing the people around us, reflecting on ourselves to not follow the examples of failure. So then the questions to ask ourselves in personal reflection will be things like, am I being too controlling sometimes, too perfectionistic, too demanding? And the other question, have you ever felt the urge to interfere? I know I have. Real wisdom is understanding what is your own business to mind. What is somebody else's business that isn't yours? And there is also nobody's business like the weather. Realizing this makes it easier to stick to the things within your sphere of responsibility and influence. And one more question. Have you ever resisted change? Change is always happening. Change is constant. In our world, it feels like change is happening faster and faster. So naturally, sometimes there's going to be some form of resistance. It is going against the flow, and possibly it is because of fear of the unknown. Change can be uncomfortable, and that's why some will always attempt to steer in a different direction in order to avoid change. So the only thing I can say, reflecting on all of these, is that let's remember we can enjoy our journey more by not trying to force our will on everything and everyone. The other idea is to remember that external change can also be the catalyst of internal transformation. Something outside of us has shifted. It is time for us to think about how we can engineer that internal shift to match, to even master the change and surpass and do well. Line 6. The one who grasps it will lose. Here, grasping just means holding on to attachments, trying to possess it, being possessive. And Tao masters, when explaining this concept, they often speak of water pouring on a clenched fist. None of the water, representing the good things in life, can be retained. The clenched fist is someone who wants it so badly and is trying so hard to hang on to it. But trying harder only makes matters worse. It is a common pattern in life. For instance, think about the times when you try to remember something, and the harder you try, the more that something resists recollection. And think about the times when you try really hard to go to sleep. The harder you try, the more sleep eludes you. And all of these patterns are seen throughout daily life and the world itself. Grasping leads to loss. You know, I saw a friend of mine who has a cat. The cat comes over, he pets it gently, wanting it to stay. But then he tried to pull it close to hold it. The cat immediately sprints out of the room. The different approach of being still is what attracts the cat. Trying to control it, trying to hang on to it, is what loses the cat. I found that to be a fitting metaphor for life. I've also seen friends who are very athletic, who are very competitive. They want to win so much. They want to be the champion, but they end up sabotaging their own progress. They injure themselves from overtraining. Did it too much. So, yet another common pattern in life. So, with the same mindset, based on the Tao, a cultivator would do things differently. A cultivator would relax. Think of the journey as a sightseeing tour. The journey of your life is a scenic tour, not a race. You are here for the beauty of it all, for the new experiences. You are not here to reach the finish line ahead of others. Because when you reach the finish line, the race or the life is over. I think it's better if you take your time. The second thing, other than to relax, for the Tao cultivator is to simply let it be. Accept things as they are. None of us can go back in time to change things to affect the present. So there's no point to rail against reality in the here and now. We can acknowledge that it is imperfect and that there are things we can do going forward to make it better. It sounds simple, and yet so often we forget to follow the wise advice of the Tao cultivator. Line 7. Thus all things. So this line contains only 2 characters. The second character there, the last character, the character for things, is the same one that we see in the expression, the myriad things. 万物, sometimes translated as the 10,000 things, but meaning the same thing, the myriad things. What exactly is the meaning of the myriad things? Well, it turns out there are 2 possible contexts for the meaning. Myriad things can mean, number 1, all living things, all the animals and the plants, the flora and the fauna. Or number 2, it can also mean all things, living or not. So not just the animals and plants, but also the landscape, the river, the lakes, the ocean, the clouds in the sky, everything. In this context of nature or the earth, 物 or 万物, the myriad things, just means the living things for this particular line. Now, as we study the Tao, we have seen that the Tao is a general principle that applies in different aspects of life, different levels of reality, and here it can be applied to multiple contexts. As an example, if we talk about society as a world, in the context of society, the myriad things can point to all the people. And this is not far-fetched because from the beginning, as it has always been, human beings have always been part of the myriad things. We're living things, just like the animals and plants. The life that courses through them is the same kind of life that courses through us. So keep this in mind. It becomes important as we explore the next few lines. Line 8, now referring to living things. Either lead or follow. So when sages observe nature, they note that when living things venture anywhere, they either lead or follow behind. They observe, for instance, the alpha of a wolf pack, leading the way for the pack. And that's not the only example in nature. The sages also note the herd movement, a flock of birds, a school of fish, and so on. When the animals are leading or following, the order occurs naturally, without contrivance. So this is part of nature. What about for human beings? Well, we don't have set roles. It depends on the situation. In life, we can play both the leading and the following roles. Sometimes we're both at the same time. That is, we're following someone ahead of us while leading others behind us. So you are simultaneously a leader and a follower. And as we look around in our lives, we see that, as an example, when we go to work, we see people who naturally take initiative, working on projects, while others contribute by supporting and following guidance. So there's that leading and following falling into place naturally. We look at a family, we see how parents lead children when they're young. But as the kids grow older, wise parents also learn to follow and listen to the grown-up kids. So overall, the conclusion in the Tao is that leadership and following can alternate like yin and yang. Each half of the complementary duality gives rise to the other. Nothing is ever fixed in one state. That's the Tao. Line 9. The living things either blow hot or cold. And these characters require some explanation. The second character from the left, the second character in this line, it means imparting warmth with one's breath. For instance, warming your freezing hands when it is cold outside. And what about the last character here? The last character is the opposite. It means blowing air on something to cool it down. As an example, think about the times when you have hot soup and you blow on it to cool it down so you can have it without it being too hot. In nature, there's also temperature variations. There's the warm-blooded mammals and cold-blooded reptiles. And this is reflected in society, in human interactions, which we know can span the spectrum from warm to cool. Indeed, when we use the expression blowing hot and cold, referring to relationships, it just means that there's inconsistent behavior. Perhaps one partner is warm and affectionate in a given moment, but then distant or cold the next, leaving the other one confused. We can also look at the weather. The wind can be a warm breeze or cold gust, but then neither one lasts forever. And when we talked about relationships and personal interactions, it all has to do with emotions and moods, which fluctuate. We can be enthusiastic one moment, but then disinterested the next. So overall, in the Tao, warm and cold contrasts and sustains balance. And this is a reminder, not just to the sages, but to us, that we should not cling to either. Line 10, still referring to the things, the myriad things, either have strength or weakness. And this is definitely something that becomes evident as one observes nature. The second character in this line means strong. This is still a commonly used character in modern Mandarin. The last character requires more explanation. It is commonly used in modern Mandarin, but it does not mean what here in this line, it does not have the same meaning that it does in modern times. In this usage of ancient Chinese, it means weak. But that meaning no longer exists in modern Mandarin. In modern Mandarin, the character means win or victory, which you would probably think of as the opposite of the actual ancient meaning of weak. So sticking to the original meaning, which is contrasting strength with weakness. In nature, strength can be predator. Weakness can be the prey. So lions, for instance, are strong predators. Deer are gentle and weak. Both have their place in the balance of life. And if we're not talking about an apex predator, we can also see interchanging roles. A predator can also become the prey of another predator upper in the food chain, higher up in the food chain. And we see this kind of dynamic all over the place in life, in our world as well. Throughout history, nations rise in power and then decline. So they were strong once upon a time, but then there's weakness. The wheel of strength and weakness just turn throughout history in endless variations. It is the same with business. A particular company may dominate its field, but then lose ground to smaller competitors that are more agile, move more quickly, and adapt better. The history of corporate America is full of dinosaurs that have died out, replaced by their competitors. Overall, we can see in the Tao that strength and weakness are also like the yin and yang symbol. They define each other, so the sage accepts both as necessary elements within the whole. So continuing on with strength and weakness. The example of an animal that can both be predator and prey tells us that in nature, strength and weakness can transform into each other. And not just animals either. We can see how a particular animal is strong compared to its prey, yet weak compared to its predator. But with plants, we see the same kind of interchange or transformation. A strong tree is uprooted by the storm. Supple reed bends and survives. So one might think of the tree as being strong and the reed as being weak, and yet the survivability of the reed makes it stronger, and the uprooted tree dying out is the weak one. And even if we think about just animals, the predator-prey dynamic. If we were to remove the prey from an ecology, the predator will perish as well. Nothing to eat, dies of hunger. So reflecting on that interchange, those changing dynamics, we see similar truths in human society. Strength and weakness can be highly situational. Looking at people, I mentioned a friend who was an athlete who wanted to win so badly that he ended up sabotaging his own progress. Thinking about him again, I can see the truth that the athlete may dominate in sports, but falters in other areas. This is true not just involving sports, but all fields of human endeavor. An introvert may be weak socially and yet be strong in solitary creativity. By this, I do not mean to imply that introverts must always be lacking in social skills. There are many high-functioning introverts who are strong socially. But then, because they're human beings, they are weak in some aspects. So this is just an example about how strength and weakness can be highly dependent. Nothing is set. This is the overall insight from Lao Tzu into the nature of reality. It is the yin and yang principles at work. Everything changes. Nothing stays that way in a static situation forever. Line 11, either have ownership or take by force. In this line, we have a similar situation as the previous line. In the last line, the last character is a character used in modern times, but had a completely different meaning in ancient times. Here, we have a character, the last character, that is not used at all in modern Mandarin. But let's start with the second character first. The second character in modern times means to carry, to support. In this usage from ancient times, it is to reside in place and maintain ownership. The context in this line is that the nest, the den, the dwelling of the animal is a place that carries and supports a family of animals. Therefore, its residents defend it, their home, against attempts to invade. So then the last character there, the opposite of this character, as I mentioned, no longer used very much at all in modern Mandarin. It means taken over through the destruction of defenses. So the two are complements of each other. It is similar to the predator-prey dynamic. And we talked about how in that dynamic, a predator can also be prey. In a similar way, what is taken over by force can in turn be taken by others. Again, with the use of force. So in nature, possession is fluid. Territories shift. Nests are abandoned. Animals migrate. Ecological niches can be displaced, perhaps destroyed. we can see the battle for dominance over territories. In society, the same dynamic holds. We see turf wars at the personal or group level. Ownership of a territory can change hands. Nothing is permanent. And overall, those who resort to force invariably lose what they seized. In business, we can see how a company defends its market share against its rivals. But then another company may be aggressively taken over and acquiring its competitors. We see that all the time. So this mirrors what actually happens in nature. At the personal level, think about your interactions facing the challenges of life. One may keep integrity under pressure. Another person may yield to temptation and corruption. All we can say is that in the Tao, all things rise and fall. Obstruction and ruin, defense, repelling invaders, these are natural turns in the cycles of transformation. All the forces that we can identify alternate between defending and overtaking, resistance and conquest. They form the balance of change. So we have now gone through 4 characteristics or attributes of the myriad of things. We can now go to a graphic to pull everything together. We begin this graphic with everything below the sky. The expression that we talked about a little earlier, 天下, all below the sun. So it is the world in which we live. And if you and I cultivate the Tao, then we should be familiar with the concept of guan. Guan is observation. The 2 characters together, 静观, is the observation of the world in tranquility in order to understand without getting attached to anything or interfering with anything. What do we observe? Well, the sages observe the myriad things, beginning with nature. It is a communion with nature to use its wisdom to shed light on life, reality, existence, and the Tao itself. So the animals, the plants, in the natural setting, the interactions of the myriad things, they reflect what we can also observe in human society, where all the people take on the characteristics and variations that we observe in nature. Now, when we talked about lead or follow, one of the things that the sages noted was that the myriad things do not move in a random way. There is purpose in their movements. They lead, they follow, and they are described as leading the pack or following close behind, following the herd. We reflect upon human beings and realize the same applies to us, except we're at a different level than the animals, and therefore our lives are more complex. Sometimes we have to follow, being part of a team at work, and sometimes we have to lead, like parenting, raising kids. So the two-sided arrows in the line between them indicates that nature and humanity reflect one another due to their oneness. We're part of nature. Then, the line from Lao Tzu is that the myriad of things blow hot or cold. This is to impart warmth or to cool things down. In nature, there's always the distinction of temperature differences that manifest in different ways. Not just animals. We note that daytime is warmer, nighttime is cooler, summer is hotter, winter is colder. So the variations prevail among the living things. Warm-blooded animals, as we mentioned, and cold-blooded reptiles. The ancients also noted that different creatures thrive in different temperatures. Some like it cold. Further north, some like it hot, further south. So reflecting this upon human beings, it is very much mirroring the way that we deal with one another. All interactions can be cool, can be warm, or somewhere in between. We describe passion as hot. We talk about getting the cold shoulder. So temperature is very much a metaphor that we use in describing interactions. In a social setting, we talk about breaking the ice. When somebody reacts in a neutral way, we may say it's a lukewarm reaction. Things can get heated in a contentious situation. We want to cool off the temperature. So the metaphor shows up all the time in the human sphere. So just like it is with lead and follow, our approach in life varies. It all depends on what is necessary at the moment. And we can begin to see a consistent theme in this concept from Lao Tzu. It is beginning to emerge. The third attribute or characteristic of the myriad of things is strength or weakness. Predators are strong, prey is weak. And they revolve and transform into each other like the yin and yang symbol. And this is manifesting in many different ways as well. So for instance, even the most powerful predators, newborn animals are weak. As they mature, they gain strength. As they age, they become weak again. This is, of course, reflected among humanity as well. Similar variations of strength and weakness, always in flux, without any lasting absolutes. The complexity of our lives means there will always be situations where we showcase our strength, we do well. And some may say, well, that is my strong suit. We definitely use that expression. There will also be situations where some do not do quite as well, and people are often quick to admit where they are weak. Now, because life is constantly changing, a weakness in one moment may become a strength when someone works at it through sustained effort. And the opposite is also true. A strength may become a weakness if it is neglected for too long, like a muscle that is unused for a long period of time. So then the last one from Lao Tzu is about sustaining, defending, occupying a niche, or taking it over through destruction. So this is what I would call ownership or takeover. It drives home the point that the wisdom of nature is reflective of human beings. We see the myriad things engaged in survival of the fittest. It is the fight or flight reflex. For an animal, to fight is to defend its niche. Flight is the abandoning of it because the invader has taken it by force. What about human beings? Well, we definitely have our social competitions as well. The struggle can be just as fierce, even if it is only our livelihood and not individual lives that is at stake, like it is for the animals. And when it comes to humanity, people tend to develop areas of competition, specialization. It becomes their niche, their vocation, their calling, or their profession. Sometimes they settle into a comfortable routine, and that's when their niche has become a comfort zone. Invariably, changes happen, forcing them out of it and venture into a new territory. So in this one slide, we can see a summation of all the observations of nature and how they reflect upon observations of humanity as well. This takes us to our last section. Line 12. Therefore, the sages mentioning the sages is a confirmation that it is the sage who has been observing the myriad things. Upon that observation, the sage notes the variations among them. And noting the variations, the sage is applying those observations to humanity. In society, as it is in nature, nothing is fixed. Everything is transient. And we might also say everything is impermanent. And from all this, the sage gains insights for the best way to live. It is all from the similarities between human society and nature, how things can change, sometimes very quickly. Someone can go from rags to riches, or the other way around. Someone can be, in his line of work, the mighty king of the jungle, and overnight become a little mouse, fearing for its life, metaphorically speaking. Because things can change, it leads the sage to the conclusion, line 13, eliminates extremes. Extremes in the sense of being over the top, doing too much. And the sages, having observed the myriad things with a tranquil and clear mind, realize that there is no need to be extreme in pursuing position or power. There is no reason to lose oneself in extreme emotions. There is no reason to glorify strength or despise weakness. So what we can get from all this is that one should avoid thinking in extreme ways, like thinking in absolutes. For instance, you are either with me or against me. That would be absolutes. We would be able to see that leading and following are conditional. And when we talked about extreme emotions, using temperature as a metaphor, we mentioned the heat of contention, like arguments and fights. So the realization is, why should we get all worked up to that emotional extreme in view of everything being transient? There is also the depth of depression. Again, that would be an extreme. There's no need to be down in the dumps because things will change. Things will always change. And we should also learn to not be extreme about strength or weakness, because what is strong today may not be strong tomorrow. Everything is in flux. The same goes for weakness. So despite seeing someone who's weak today, but then it becomes strong, well, it was unwise to hold them in contempt. So because of all this, a sage would avoid using harsh words, would speak moderately instead of attacking or flattering. Similarly, the sage would not practice self-denial, nor would the sage indulge in extravagant luxuries, but instead would follow the middle path of moderation. And in dealing with others, a sage would not label them as wholly good or completely evil. They see light and shadow in everybody. This moderation applies to diet, exercise, conversation, everything. The sage finds harmony in balance, not in extremes. So you can see that there's a couple more lessons that the sages have taken from nature and applied to their own lives as they live among humanity. However, we are now getting close to the top of the hour, so it is time for us to go to the end of our meeting today to summarize what we have talked about today. In our previous summary, we talked about the world being a sacred vessel. So all those who wish to exert control, they will always fail because they set themselves against the natural order. And we talked about the different levels of the world. We talked about how at every level of existence, it is simply the Tao manifesting in a particular way as the sacred vessel of the world. Those who try to take it, who try to control it, using force upon it, will always end up defeated. And those who try to possess it will always have it slip away. Therefore, the sages learn from nature. They refrain from domination. They know that harmony can only come from alignment. So that is the summary for the previous meeting that we had. What about for today? From observing nature to living the Tao. First, we noted how the sages looked at nature and saw variations, differences. Some of the myriad things lead and follow, and we are the same. We human beings are not so different. And the living things, the myriad of creatures, there's warmer and cooler temperatures. This is likewise reflected in our lives, the way that we interact and socialize with one another. Among the myriad things, there's strength, there's weakness, and they go back and forth. It is the same for us. You and I manifest both strength and weakness. And lastly, ownership changes hands. This is from the observation of the animal habitats being defended or taken over through destruction. Just like what happens in our world. Lastly, the transformation and transience of life. We have talked about the first one. There's no need for extremes because nothing is set in stone. Everything changes. Everything is shifting back and forth. And we will also see next time that there is no need for excess. There is no need for arrogance. Overall, Lao Tzu would advise us to live a life in a way that is moderate, simple, and humble. That is the way of living that takes us to the Tao. Share the Tao. For easy access to Tao resources, visit my website, dereklin.com. There, you can click on links and see everything listed, such as Taoism.net, information about the Tao and this meeting. Our Facebook community, a place to discuss the Tao with fellow seekers. Our YouTube channel, recordings of all our previous meetings. My Amazon author page, books and audiobooks for further exploration. You can go directly to this page at dereklin.com/links. When you see the benefits of the Tao in your life, share your experience through comments in Facebook and share these resources with friends who may also benefit. If you find my books or audiobooks helpful, please post your reviews on Amazon to guide others to the Tao. If you have connections to prisoners interested in the Tao, contact me through Derek Lin Books on Facebook, and I will send my books to them free of charge. This is the path that I am on, so I can say sharing the Tao has transformed my life in incredible ways. I would like to invite you to come along. Let us travel together on the path in the journey of life. Our meeting has come to an end, but the journey continues on. Until next time, may the Tao fill you with peace and happiness.